I'm sitting in my car outside the same grocery store where it all started, watching the rain streak down my windshield like tears I haven't been able to shed in months. The parking lot looks different now, smaller somehow, though I know nothing has really changed except me. 3 years have passed since that night when Aaron Allen found me here, broken and sobbing over something I couldn't even name at the time. 3 years since he became the reason I learned what it meant to truly smile. Not just the practiced expression I'd worn like armor for so long. The memory comes back in fragments, the way important moments always do. I was 24 then, fresh out of a relationship with Nancy Roberts that had felt like wearing clothes that never quite fit. We dated for 2 years because it seemed like what I was supposed to do, what everyone expected. She was beautiful, kind, everything any reasonable person would want. But sitting in this parking lot that October night, I finally understood why I had felt like I was suffocating. I'd been crying because I couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. Why every kiss felt like an apology, every intimate moment like a performance I was failing at. Nancy deserved better than someone who flinched at her touch, who made excuses to avoid the physical closeness she craved. The breakup had been mutual, civilized, but it left me with questions I wasn't ready to ask myself. That's when Aaron's headlights swept across my car. I remember ducking my head, hoping he wouldn't notice me. But Aaron had always been the kind of person who noticed everything. He was my co-worker at the marketing firm downtown, the guy who brought coffee for everyone on Monday mornings and remembered birthdays that others forgot. We'd worked together for almost a year, and I'd spent most of that time trying not to notice how his laugh made something flutter in my chest, how his presence could calm the constant anxiety that seemed to live in my bones. He knocked on my passenger when his face concerned in the fluorescent glow of the parking lot lights. When I rolled it down, he didn't ask what was wrong or try to offer easy solutions. He just said, "Want some company?" and waited for my answer. I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice, and he walked around to slide into the passenger seat. The car suddenly felt smaller with him in it, filled with the scent of his cologne and something else, something warm and essentially him that I'd been trying not to breathe in for months. Before I continue, I have to pause and say something to anyone listening to this story. If you're out there somewhere, maybe in your own care or walking through your own difficult moment, I want you to know you're not alone. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And if this story resonates with you, hit that hype button to help others find it too. Sometimes we all need to know that someone else has walked this path before us. Aaron didn't say anything at first. He just sat there, present in a way that felt like a gift. Finally, he asked, "Bad day?" And I almost laughed because it seemed so inadequate for what I was feeling. "Bad life, maybe," I said, and immediately regretted the honesty. But Aaron just nodded like he understood. "Those happen too," he said. "Want to talk about it?" I found myself telling him about Nancy, about the relationship that had ended because I couldn't be what she needed. I told him about feeling lost, about not understanding why I couldn't just be normal, why love felt like something I was watching from the outside rather than experiencing. I didn't tell him about the dreams I'd been having, about waking up with his name on my lips, about the way my heart raced when he smiled at me across the office. Aaron listened without judgment, occasionally making soft sounds of understanding. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain. "You know," he said finally, "sometimes the hardest part isn't figuring out what's wrong with us. It's accepting that maybe nothing is wrong at all. Maybe we're just different than we thought we were." Something in his voice made me look at him more closely. There was a gentleness there, but also something deeper, something that felt like recognition, like he was speaking from experience rather than just offering comfort. That night marked the beginning of something I couldn't name. Aaron and I started spending more time together, grabbing lunch, staying late at the office to work on projects that didn't really require both of us. He had a way of making me feel comfortable in my own skin, something I'd never experienced before. With Nancy, I'd always felt like I was performing, trying to be the boyfriend she deserved. With Aaron, I could just be. We fell into an easy friendship that felt both natural and charged with something I was afraid to examine too closely. He'd bring me coffee in the morning, exactly how I liked it though. I'd never told him my preference. He'd text me articles he thought I'd find interesting, always with some small comment that showed he'd been thinking of me. When I had to work late, he'd order dinner to the office, claiming he was hungry too, even though I suspected he'd already eaten. The thing about Aaron was that he never pushed. He seemed to understand that I was working through something, and he gave me space to figure it out while making sure I knew he was there. It was a kind of patience I'd never experienced before, and it made me feel both grateful and terrified. I started looking forward to seeing him with an intensity that scared me. I'd find myself checking my reflection in the bathroom mirror before meetings where he'd be present, choosing shirts I thought he might like, staying later at work on the off chance he might need help with something. I told myself it was just friendship, but deep down I knew I was lying. The first time I really acknowledged what I was feeling was during our company's holiday party in December. I'd gone alone, having broken up with Nancy months earlier, and spent most of the evening making small talk with colleagues while secretly watching Aaron across the room. He was wearing a dark blue shirt that brought out his eyes, and every time he laughed, I felt that familiar flutter in my chest. Victoria Rogers from accounting had been flirting with him all evening, and I found myself irrationally jealous. She was beautiful, confident, exactly the kind of woman who should catch his attention. But Aaron seemed politely disinterested, his eyes occasionally finding mine across the room in a way that made my breath catch. Near the end of the evening, he appeared at my side with 2 glasses of wine. "You look like you could use this," he said, and I realized I'd been gripping my empty beer bottle so tightly my knuckles were white. "Thanks," I managed, accepting the wine. Our fingers brushed as he handed it to me, and I had to resist the urge to hold on longer than necessary. "Want to get some air?" he asked, and I nodded, following him out onto the hotel's terrace. The December air was crisp, and I could see my breath in small puffs as we leaned against the railing overlooking the city. "Nice party," Aaron said, though his tone suggested he didn't really think so. "Victoria seemed to think you were having a good time," I said, then immediately wanted to take it back. The comment sounded petty even to my own ears. Aaron looked at me with surprise, then something that might have been amusement. "Victoria's nice," he said carefully, "but she's not really my type." "What is your type?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks despite the cold air. Aaron was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the dim light from the party inside. "I think," he said slowly, "my type is someone who understands what it's like to feel like you don't quite fit in the box everyone expects you to. Someone who's kind without trying to be, who notices when people are struggling and actually cares enough to do something about it." My heart was beating so hard I was sure he could hear it. "That's pretty specific," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Yeah," he said, still looking at me with that intense expression. "I guess it is." We stood there in silence, the weight of unspoken things hanging between us like fog. I wanted to say something, to acknowledge what felt like was happening, but fear held my tongue. What if I was reading too much into his words? What if I ruined the best friendship I'd ever had by wanting more? "We should probably head back in," Aaron said finally, and I nodded, though part of me wanted to stay out there forever, suspended in that moment of possibility. The months that followed were a study in tension and restraint. Aaron and I grew closer, spending more time together outside of work, but always maintaining the careful boundaries of friendship. We go to movies, grab dinner, even take weekend hiking trips, but there was always an invisible line neither of us seemed willing to cross. I started paying more attention to the way he interacted with other people, looking for clues about his sexuality that I might have missed. He never mentioned dating anyone, never showed interest in the women at work who clearly found him attractive. There were moments when I caught him looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, moments when our conversations felt charged with meaning beyond the words we were actually saying. One evening in March, we were at his apartment watching a movie, something we'd started doing regularly on Friday nights. I'd brought Chinese takeout, and we were sitting on his couch, closer than strictly necessary, but not quite touching. The movie was a romantic comedy that neither of us was really paying attention to, and I found myself hyper-aware of every small movement he made, every shift that brought him slightly closer or farther away. During a particularly cheesy scene, Aaron made a sarcastic comment about the male lead's grand romantic gesture, and I laughed, turning to look at him. He was already looking at me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. The laughter died in my throat as I saw something in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. Ryan, he said quietly, and my name sounded different in his voice. Softer somehow. Yeah? He seemed to be struggling with something, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to find the right words. Finally, he shook his head and looked away. Nothing. Never mind. The moment passed, but it left me shaken. I spent the rest of the movie in a state of heightened awareness, every casual touch of his hand against mine, when we reached for popcorn, feeling electric. When I left that night, I sat in my car for 10 minutes, trying to calm down before I trusted myself to drive. I started having dreams about him, vivid dreams that left me confused and aroused and guilty all at once. I'd wake up with the memory of his hands on my skin, his mouth against mine, and spend the rest of the day trying to act normal when I saw him at work. It was torture, but it was also a kind of awakening. For the first time in my life, I understood what desire was supposed to feel like. The breaking point came in May. We'd been working late on a presentation for a major client, just the two of us in the empty office. It was past 9 o'clock, and we were both punchy from too much caffeine and not enough food. Aaron had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and I was trying not to stare at his forearms as he gestured while explaining a concept. I think we should call it a night, Opo, he said, finally rubbing his eyes. We can finish this tomorrow. I nodded, starting to pack up my things, but when I stood up, I knocked over my coffee mug, sending lukewarm coffee across the conference table and onto Aaron's warm shirt. Shit, I'm sorry, I said, grabbing napkins and trying to clean up the mess. Aaron stood up, looking down at his stained shirt with a rueful expression. It's fine, he said. I have a spare shirt in my office. I followed him to his office, still apologizing, while he pulled a clean shirt from his desk drawer. Without thinking, he started unbuttoning the stained one, and I found myself frozen in the doorway, unable to look away as he revealed the lean muscle of his chest and shoulders. He must have sensed my stare because he looked up, his hands stilling on the buttons. Our eyes met, and something passed between us that was impossible to ignore. The air in the small office felt thick, charged with electricity. Ryan, he said again, and this time my name sounded like a question. I took a step forward, then another, until I was close enough to touch him. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own thoughts over the rush of blood in my ears. I don't know what I'm doing, I whispered, reaching out to touch his chest, my fingers trembling against his skin. Neither do I, he said, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he covered my hand with his, pressing it more firmly against his chest, where I could feel his heart beating as fast as mine. We stood like that for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Both of us breathing hard, both of us afraid to move first. Finally, Aaron lifted his free hand to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone. Is this okay? He asked, and I nodded, not trusting my voice. He leaned in slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away, but I didn't want to. When his lips touched mine, it was like everything I'd been missing suddenly clicked into place. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but when I responded, pressing closer, it deepened into something that made my knees weak. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Aaron rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. I've wanted to do that for so long, he whispered, and the confession sent a thrill through me. Me too, I admitted, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. We didn't talk about what happened that night, not right away. The next day at work, we were both careful, professional, but there was a new awareness between us that was impossible to ignore. Every accidental touch, every shared glance felt loaded with significance. I found myself replaying the kiss over and over, the memory of his hands on my face, the way he tasted like coffee and possibility. But along with the memory came fear. What did this mean? Was I gay? Bisexual? The labels felt foreign and frightening. I'd spent my whole life assuming I was straight, building my identity around that assumption. The idea that I might have been wrong about something so fundamental was terrifying. I started avoiding Aaron, making excuses to skip our usual lunches, declining invitations to hang out. I told myself I needed time to think, to figure out what I was feeling. But really, I was just scared. Scared of what wanting him might mean about me. Scared of what other people would think. Scared of losing the safe, predictable life I'd built for myself. Aaron, to his credit, didn't push. He gave me space while making it clear that he was still there if I needed him. But I could see the hurt in his eyes when I made another excuse. Another reason why I couldn't spend time with him. I was hurting him by pulling away, but I didn't know how to stop. The avoidance lasted for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of misery, of missing him with an intensity that surprised me, of lying awake at night thinking about that kiss, and hating myself for being too much of a coward to explore what it might mean. I threw myself into work, into the gym, into anything that might distract me from the growing certainty that I was making a terrible mistake. The wake-up call came from an unexpected source. I was having lunch with Janet Price, a friend from college who'd always been direct to the point of brutality. She'd been watching me push food around my plate for 20 minutes, barely participating in the conversation, when she finally called me out. "Okay, what's wrong with you?" she demanded. "You look like someone killed your dog, and you've been acting weird for weeks." "Nothing's wrong," I said automatically, but Janet just raised an eyebrow. "Bullshit. I've known you for 8 years, Ryan. You're miserable about something, and it's not work because you love your job." "So what is it? Girl trouble?" The question hit closer to home than she could have known. "Something like that," I said. "Want to talk about it?" I found myself telling her about Aaron, though I left out the specifics of our relationship and the kiss. I told her about our friendship, about how much I'd come to care about him, about how I'd been pulling away because I was confused about my feelings. "Let me get this straight," Janet said when I finished. "You have this amazing friendship with someone who clearly cares about you, and you're avoiding him because you're afraid you might like him too much?" Put like that, it sounded ridiculous. It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're scared of being happy. Her words stayed with me for the rest of the day. Was that what I was doing? Running away from happiness? Because it didn't look the way I'd expected it to? That evening, I drove to Aaron's apartment without calling first. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, working up the courage to knock on his door. When he answered, he looked surprised to see me, and I realized how much I'd missed his face. "Hi," I said, suddenly unsure of what I'd planned to say. "Hi," he said back, stepping aside to let me in. "You want some coffee?" I nodded, following him to the kitchen. He moved around the familiar space, pulling out mugs and starting the coffee maker, and I watched him with a mixture of affection and longing that made my chest tight. "I'm sorry," I said suddenly, and he turned to look at me. "For what?" "For avoiding you, for being a coward, for making you think that what happened was a mistake." Aaron leaned against the counter, studying my face. Was it a mistake? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I thought about lying, about taking the safe route and pretending that the kiss had been a momentary lapse in judgment. But looking at him, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression, I couldn't do it. "No," I said quietly. "It wasn't a mistake. It was the first thing that's felt right in a long time." The relief in Aaron's face was almost painful to see. He pushed off from the counter, crossing the small kitchen until he was standing in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. "I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing," he said, reaching up to cup my face the same way he had in the office. "Or that you regretted it." "I was scared," I admitted. "I've never felt like this about anyone before, especially not about a man. I didn't know what to do with it. And now?" I leaned into his touch, closing my eyes. "Now I think I want to find out what happens if I stop being scared." He kissed me then, soft and sweet, and this time I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, letting myself feel everything I'd been trying to suppress. When we broke apart, I was breathless. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said. "I don't know how to be with someone like this." "Neither do I," Aaron said, smiling. "We can figure it out together." And we did, slowly and carefully. We talked about what we were feeling, what we wanted, what scared us. Aaron told me about his own journey of self-discovery, about coming out to himself in college and to his family a few years later. He was patient with my questions, my fears, my need to take things slowly. We didn't label what we were to each other, not at first. We just spent time together, learning each other in new ways. Aaron would cook dinner while I sat at his kitchen counter, telling him about my day. We'd watch movies on his couch, and I'd let myself curl up against his side, marveling at how right it felt to be held by him. The physical intimacy developed gradually. Kisses became longer, deeper. Casual touches became more intentional. The first time Aaron spent the night at my apartment, we barely slept, too busy talking and touching and exploring this new dimension of our relationship. I woke up with his arm around me and felt a peace I'd never experienced before. But even as I was falling deeper for Aaron, part of me was still struggling with what it all meant. I found myself researching sexuality online, trying to understand myself better. Was I gay? Bisexual? Did it matter? The labels felt both important and inadequate, necessary for understanding myself, but insufficient to capture the complexity of what I was feeling. The real test came when Aaron suggested we attend a Pride event together. It was June and the city's Pride Festival was in full swing. Aaron had been going for years, he told me, but he'd always gone alone. This year he wanted to go with me. The idea terrified me. It felt like such a public declaration, such a definitive step into a world I wasn't sure I was ready to be part of. But when I saw how much it meant to Aaron, how his face lit up when he talked about sharing that experience with me, I couldn't say no. The festival was overwhelming in the best possible way. There were thousands of people, all celebrating love and identity and authenticity in ways I'd never seen before. Aaron held my hand as we walked through the crowds, and while I was initially self-conscious about the public display of affection, his confidence helped me relax. We stopped at various booths, talked to people, listened to speakers and performers. I watched Aaron in his element, comfortable and proud, and felt a mixture of admiration and envy. He'd done the work of accepting himself years ago, while I was still catching up. Near the end of the day, we were sitting on a blanket in the park, sharing a funnel cake and watching the crowd. Aaron was telling me about his first Pride event, how nervous he'd been, how liberating it had felt to be surrounded by people who understood him. "What about you?" he asked. "How are you feeling about all this?" I looked around at the celebration, at the couples holding hands, at the families with rainbow flags, at the joy and acceptance that seemed to permeate everything. "Overwhelmed," I said honestly, "but in a good way. Like maybe there's a place for me here after all." Aaron smiled, leaning over to kiss my cheek. "There's always been a place for you here. You just had to be ready to see it." Summer passed in a blur of happiness I hadn't known was possible. Aaron and I settled into a rhythm that felt natural and right. We spent most evenings together, either at his place or mine. We took weekend trips to the mountains, went to concerts, tried new restaurants. I met his friends, a warm group of people who welcomed me without question, and slowly started coming out to my own circle. The conversations with my friends went better than I'd expected. Most of them had suspected something was different about my relationship with Aaron, and they were happy to see me so obviously content. Janet predictably claimed she'd seen it coming from the beginning, though I was pretty sure that was revisionist history. My family was a different story. I'd always been close to my parents, but they were traditional conservative people who'd never had much exposure to LGBTQ issues. The thought of telling them about Aaron filled me with dread, so I kept putting it off, making excuses for why Aaron couldn't come to family dinners or holiday gatherings. Aaron was understanding about my reluctance, but I could tell it bothered him to be kept separate from such an important part of my life. We had our first real fight about it in August, after I made another excuse for why he couldn't come to my sister's birthday party. "I'm not asking you to make some grand announcement," he said, frustration clear in his voice. "But I feel like you're ashamed of me, of us." "That's not true," I protested. But even as I said it, I wondered if there wasn't some truth to his accusation. Was I ashamed? Or was I just scared? Then what is it? "Because I'm tired of feeling like your dirty little secret." The words stung because they weren't entirely unfair. I had been keeping him separate, compartmentalizing my life in a way that wasn't sustainable. But the thought of my parents' reaction, of potentially losing their approval, was paralyzing. "I need more time," I said, and Aaron's face fell. How much more time, Ryan? It's been 4 months. I have been patient, but I can't keep pretending this doesn't hurt. We didn't resolve the fight that night or the next. Aaron gave me space to think, but the distance between us felt different this time, charged with hurt and disappointment rather than just fear. I knew I was at a crossroads, that I had to make a choice between the safety of keeping my two worlds separate and the risk of integrating them. The decision was made for me in September. My mother called to tell me that my father had been in a car accident. He wasn't seriously injured, but he was in the hospital overnight for observation. I was so shaken by the call that I immediately called Aaron, forgetting for a moment that we were in the middle of this complicated dance around my family. "I'll drive you," he said without hesitation when I told him what had happened. "You shouldn't be alone right now." I wanted to say yes so badly it physically hurt. I wanted his comfort, his steady presence, his hand to hold in the hospital waiting room. But I also knew that showing up with him would require explanations I wasn't ready to give. "I should go alone," I said, and I heard Aaron's sharp intake of breath. "Right," he said quietly. "Of course." The hurt in his voice broke something in me, but I didn't know how to fix it. I drove to the hospital alone, sat with my family alone, and felt the absence of the person I most wanted beside me like a physical ache. My father was fine, released the next morning, with nothing more than some bruises and a stern lecture about defensive driving. But the experience had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. Life was fragile, unpredictable. The people we loved could be taken from us without warning, and I was wasting precious time being afraid. I called Aaron as soon as I got home, but it went to voicemail. I tried again an hour later, then again that evening. He finally answered on the third day, his voice carefully neutral. "How's your dad?" he asked. "He's fine. Aaron, we need to talk." "Do we?" The distance in. His voice scared me more than any fight we'd had. "Please, can I come over?" There was a long pause. "I don't think that's a good idea right now." "Aaron, please, I know I hurt you, but I want to fix this." "I don't think you can fix this, Ryan. Not unless you are ready to actually be with me, all of me, in all parts of your life, and I don't think you are." The line went quiet, and I realized he'd hung up. I stared at my phone, feeling like the world had shifted beneath my feet. I'd been so focused on protecting myself from the potential pain of rejection that I'd caused the very loss I was trying to avoid. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. Aaron avoided me at work, keeping our interactions strictly professional. He no longer brought coffee for the office, no longer lingered to chat about weekend plans or share funny articles he'd found online. It was like watching someone I loved disappear in slow motion. I threw myself into work, staying late, taking on extra projects, anything to avoid going home to an empty apartment that felt haunted by memories of him. My friends noticed the change in my mood, but I couldn't bring myself to explain what had happened. How could I tell them that I'd lost the best thing in my life because I was too much of a coward to fight for it? The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was working late again, the office empty except for the security guard and the cleaning crew. I was trying to focus on a presentation, but my mind kept wandering to Aaron, to the way he used to text me when I worked late to make sure I remembered to eat dinner. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice someone approaching my desk until I heard a familiar voice. "You look terrible." I looked up to find Cynthia Sanders from HR standing beside my desk, her expression concerned. Cynthia and I had always been friendly, but not close, so her presence was unexpected. "Thanks," I said dryly. "That's exactly what every man wants to hear." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm serious, Ryan. You've been working yourself to death for weeks. Everyone's noticed." "Everyone?" "Including Aaron." My hand stilled on the keyboard. "What about Aaron?" Cynthia pulled up a chair, sitting down beside my desk. "Look, I don't know what happened between you two, and it's none of my business. But I've watched you both moping around the office for weeks, and it's painful to see." "We're fine," I said automatically. "Bullshit. You're both miserable, and it's affecting everyone around you. Aaron used to be the sunshine of this office, and now he barely speaks to anyone. And you look like you haven't slept in weeks." She wasn't wrong. I'd been surviving on coffee and stubbornness, catching maybe 4 hours of sleep a night, when the exhaustion finally overwhelmed my racing thoughts. I don't know what you want me to say, Cynthia. I want you to say what everyone already knows, that you're in love with him and you're too scared to do anything about it. The words hit me like a physical blow. It's not that simple, isn't it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks pretty simple. You have feelings for each other, something went wrong, and now you're both too proud or too scared to fix it. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly feeling exhausted. You don't understand. My family, they wouldn't accept it. I could lose them. And what have you gained by keeping them? Because you don't look like someone who's won anything. Her words echoed in my head long after she left. What had I gained by choosing the safe path? I still hadn't told my family about Aaron, so I hadn't preserved anything. I just lost the person who mattered most to me while gaining nothing in return. That weekend, I did something I'd never done before. I drove to my parents' house unannounced, my heart pounding as I pulled into their driveway. My mother was in the garden tending to her roses, and she looked up in surprise when she saw me. Ryan, what a nice surprise. Your father's inside watching the game. I helped her gather her gardening tools, making small talk while working up the courage for what I needed to say. Inside, my father was indeed watching football, a beer in his hand and reading glasses perched on his nose as he followed the stats on his tablet. Hey, Dad, I said, settling onto the couch beside him. Hey, kiddo, how's work? Good, actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you both about. Something in my tone must have alerted them because my mother set down her gardening gloves and my father muted the television. What's wrong? My mother asked, immediately jumping to worst-case scenarios. Are you sick? Did you lose your job? No, nothing like that. I have something to tell you, and I'm not sure how you're going to react. They waited, and I took a deep breath, thinking of Aaron's patient smile, his steady presence, the way he'd made me feel like I could be myself for the first time in my life. I'm gay, I said simply, or bisexual. I'm not entirely sure about the label, but I've been in a relationship with someone, a man named Aaron, and I love him. The silence that followed felt eternal. My parents exchanged a look that I couldn't read, and I braced myself for rejection, for disappointment, for all the fears that had kept me silent for so long. Finally, my father cleared his throat. How long have you known? About myself? Not long. About Aaron? Almost a year. And you didn't tell us because? I looked down at my hands, feeling like a child again. Because I was scared you'd be disappointed in me, or that you'd reject me. My mother made a soft sound, moving to sit on my other side. Oh, honey, is that really what you think of us? I don't know what to think. You've never exactly been vocal supporters of LGBTQ rights. That's different, my father said gruffly. That's politics. This is our son. My mother reached over to take my hand. We love you, Ryan. That doesn't change because of who you love. It might take us some time to adjust, to understand, but it doesn't change how we feel about you. The relief was so overwhelming, I almost started crying. Really? Really? Now tell us about Aaron. When do we get to meet him? The conversation with my parents went better than I dared to hope. They asked questions, some of them awkward, but all of them coming from a place of love and genuine desire to understand. My mother wanted to know if Aaron made me happy, if he treated me well. My father asked practical questions about our relationship, our future plans, whether Aaron was someone they should be concerned about. By the time I left their house that evening, I felt lighter than I had in months. But the relief was tempered by the knowledge that I might have lost Aaron while I was finding the courage to fight for him. Monday morning, I arrived at work early, hoping to catch Aaron before the office filled up with people. He was already at his desk, coffee in hand, focused on his computer screen. He looked up when I approached, and I saw wariness in his expression. Can we talk? I asked. I'm pretty busy, he said, turning back to his screen. Please, 5 minutes. He sighed, saving his work and following me to the empty conference room where we'd had our first kiss. The irony wasn't lost on me. I told my parents about us, I said without preamble. Aaron's eyes widened. What? Yesterday, I drove to their house and told them I was gay, that I'd been in a relationship with you, that I loved you. Loved? Aaron's voice was carefully neutral. Past tense? Love, present tense. Very present tense. Aaron leaned against the conference table, arms crossed. What did they say? They want to meet you. They want to know when you're coming to dinner. For the first time in weeks, I saw something soften in Aaron's expression. And what did you tell them? That I'd have to ask you, since I'd been an idiot and pushed away the best thing that ever happened to me. Aaron was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. What changed? Almost losing my dad made me realize how much time I was wasting being scared. And then Cynthia called me out on my bullshit, made me see that I wasn't protecting anything by keeping us separate. I was just hurting both of us. Cynthia from HR? She said we were both miserable and it was affecting the whole office. Aaron's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. She's not wrong. I've been pretty pathetic. We both have. I took a step closer. Aaron, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making you feel like a secret, for not being brave enough to fight for us sooner. I know I hurt you, and I know I might have lost my chance, but I had to try. Aaron uncrossed his arms, and I took it as encouragement to continue. I love you, I said. I love your patience, your kindness, the way you make me feel. Like I can be myself. I love how you bring coffee for everyone, even when you're running late. How you remember people's birthdays. How you found me crying in a parking lot and somehow became the reason I learned to smile. Really smile. Not just the fake one I'd been wearing for years. Aaron's eyes were bright, and I thought I saw tears threatening to spill over. I love you too, he said quietly. But I can't go through this again, Ryan. I can't keep being the person you love in private, but can't acknowledge in public. You won't have to. I want to bring you to family dinners, to office parties, to pride events. I want to hold your hand in public and not care who sees. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not one where we have to hide. Aaron pushed off from the table, crossing the small space between us. You mean that? I've never meant anything more in my life. He reached up to cup my face, his thumb brushing across my cheekbone in the gesture I'd missed so desperately. I've been miserable without you. Me too. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of forgiveness. When we broke apart, we were both smiling. So, Aaron said, when am I meeting your parents? How about Sunday dinner? My mom's already planning the menu. Aaron laughed, the sound I'd missed more than I'd realized. Sunday dinner it is. Sunday dinner with my parents was both exactly what I'd expected and completely different. My mother had indeed planned an elaborate menu, cooking enough food for twice as many people as would be eating. She fussed over Aaron from the moment we walked in the door, complimenting his flowers, his shirt, his manners, everything she could think of. My father was more reserved, but I could tell he was making an effort. He asked Aaron about his work, his family, his interests. They discovered a shared love of baseball, and soon they were deep in discussion about the upcoming playoffs, leaving my mother and me to exchange amused glances. He's lovely, my mother whispered to me while we were clearing the dinner dishes. I can see why you fell for him. You really like him? I like how happy you are when you look at him, she said. That's all that matters to me. After dinner, Aaron helped with the dishes despite my mother's protests, and my father dragged out photo albums, subjecting Aaron to embarrassing childhood pictures and stories I'd hoped would never see the light of day. Aaron took it all in stride, laughing at the appropriate moments and asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested. As we were leaving, my mother pulled Aaron aside for a private conversation. I couldn't hear what she said, but I saw him nod seriously, then smile and hug her. When he rejoined me at the car, I raised an eyebrow in question. She told me to take good care of you, he said, grinning, and that if I ever hurt you, she knows where I live. She said that? She's very protective of you. I like that about her. The drive home was comfortable, filled with Aaron's observations about my family, stories from his own childhood, plans for future visits. It felt natural, right? Like this was how things were always supposed to be. Over the following months, Aaron became integrated into every part of my life. He came to family gatherings, office parties, dinners with friends. My coworkers stopped looking surprised when we arrived together, and my family started asking about him when he wasn't there. He fit seamlessly into my world, and I into his. We moved in together in December, almost exactly a year after that first night in the parking lot. Aaron's lease was up, and it seemed silly to maintain two apartments when we spent every night together anyway. The process of combining our lives, our belongings, our daily routines felt like the most natural thing in the world. I loved the domestic intimacy of living together. Making coffee together in the morning, Aaron reading me interesting articles over breakfast, coming home to find him cooking dinner with music playing softly in the background. I loved falling asleep next to him every night and waking up to his face every morning. But more than the practical aspects of cohabitation, I loved the emotional intimacy, the way Aaron would listen when I had a bad day at work, offering comfort without trying to fix everything. The way he'd share his own struggles, his fears, his dreams, trusting me with the vulnerable parts of himself. The way we'd learn to fight constructively, to disagree without damaging each other, to apologize when we were wrong. One evening in February, we were cooking dinner together, Aaron at the stove while I chopped vegetables at the counter. He was telling me about a difficult client, gesturing with a wooden spoon while he talked, and I found myself overwhelmed by how much I loved this ordinary moment. "What?" Aaron asked, noticing my stare. "Nothing, just thinking about how different my life is now compared to a year ago." Better different or worse different? Definitely better. I can't imagine going back to who I was before you. Aaron smiled, abandoning the stove to come kiss me. Good thing you don't have to. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Aaron was offered a promotion that would require occasional travel, and we had to navigate what that meant for our relationship. I struggled with jealousy and insecurity at first, worried about him being away, meeting new people, having experiences without me. But Aaron was patient with my fears, calling every night when he was away, sharing details of his trips, making sure I felt included even when we were apart. The time apart also made me appreciate what we had even more. When Aaron returned from his first business trip, I met him at the airport with flowers, not caring who saw me embrace him in the arrivals area. The older woman behind me in line smiled and said something about young love, and I felt a surge of pride. At being seen as part of a couple, at having our relationship recognized and accepted by strangers. We started talking about the future in concrete terms. Marriage, maybe kids someday, buying a house together. The conversations felt both thrilling and terrifying, but in the best possible way. I was planning a life with someone I loved, building something together that was ours. In May, almost exactly 2 years after our first kiss, Aaron planned a weekend getaway to the mountains. We'd been hiking together since the early days of our friendship, and some of our best conversations had happened on mountain trails. This trip felt different, though, special in a way I couldn't quite identify. We hiked to an overlook we'd been to before, a spot with a panoramic view of the valley below. Aaron had packed lunch, and we sat on a flat rock, eating sandwiches and enjoying the scenery. The weather was perfect, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. "I have something for you," Aaron said after we finished eating, reaching into his backpack. "It's not my birthday," I said, confused. "I know. This is something else." He pulled out a small box, and my heart stopped. It was clearly a ring box, and when he opened it, I saw a simple gold band nestled inside. "Ryan," Aaron said, his voice slightly shaky, "I know we haven't been together as long as some couples, but I can't imagine my life without you. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me." He slid off the rock, getting down on one knee on the rocky trail, and I felt tears start to flow down my cheeks. "Will you marry me?" The word yes came out as barely a whisper, but Aaron heard it. He slipped the ring onto my finger with hands that were trembling almost as much as mine, and then I was kissing him, both of us crying and laughing at the same time. We stayed on the mountain until sunset, talking about wedding plans, calling our families to share the news, marveling at how perfectly the ring fit, how right it felt to be engaged. My mother cried when I called her, and my father grumbled something about Aaron not asking for permission first, but I could hear the happiness in his voice. That night, back at the cabin Aaron had rented for the weekend, we made love with a tenderness that felt different, deeper somehow. We were no longer just boyfriends, no longer just partners. We were fiancés, committed to building a life together, and the weight of that commitment felt both profound and natural. "I love you," Aaron whispered against my ear as we lay tangled together afterward. "I love you too," I whispered back. "Thank you for finding me in that parking lot. Thank you for teaching me how to smile. Thank you for letting me," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice, even in the darkness. Now, sitting in this same parking lot 3 years later, I'm wearing Aaron's ring on my finger and planning our wedding, which is just 6 months away. We've chosen a venue, tasted cakes, argued about flower arrangements and guest lists, and whether to have a DJ or a band. The details feel both important and completely irrelevant compared to the simple fact that I get to marry the person who saved me from myself. The rain has stopped while I've been lost in memories, and the parking lot is beginning to empty as the evening shoppers head home. I should probably go too. Aaron is making dinner tonight, and he'll worry if I'm much later, but I'm reluctant to leave this place that holds so much significance for us. I pull out my phone and text him, "Running a little late, stop by our parking lot." His response comes immediately. "The grocery store? Why?" "Just thinking about that night you found me crying. How different everything is now." "Better different?" I smile, remembering asking him the same question that night we were cooking dinner together. "Definitely better. See you soon, I love you." "Love you too. Drive safe." I start the car, but before I pull out of the parking space, I take one last look around. This unremarkable patch of asphalt, surrounded by chain stores and strip malls, is where my real life began, where I stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't and started the journey toward becoming who I was meant to be. Aaron didn't just find me crying in a parking lot that night. He found someone who was lost, confused, living a half-life of careful pretense and quiet desperation. He saw through my defenses to the person I could be if I was brave enough to stop hiding. He became my safe place, my home, the reason I learned that love wasn't supposed to feel like performance or obligation. He taught me that a real smile comes from the inside, that it's not something you put on for other people, but something that happens when you're genuinely happy. That happiness isn't something you have to earn or deserve, but something you can choose if you're willing to be honest about what you want and brave enough to reach for it. The drive home takes me through the heart of the city, past the office building where we work, past the restaurant where we had our first official date, past the park where Aaron proposed. Every familiar landmark feels like a mile marker in the story of us, evidence of the life we've built together one small choice at a time. When I pull into our driveway, I can see Aaron through the kitchen window, moving around as he prepares dinner. The sight of him, so familiar and beloved, still makes my heart skip a beat. I sit in the car for a moment, watching him, marveling at the fact that this is my life now, that I get to come home to him every day, share meals and conversations and quiet moments and grand adventures. Aaron looks up and sees me sitting in the car, and his face breaks into the smile that first made me understand what I'd been missing. He waves and I wave back, feeling that flutter in my chest that I now recognize as pure joy. I think about the person I was 3 years ago, sitting in the same car in a different parking lot, crying over a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. That person couldn't have imagined this happiness, couldn't have conceived of love that felt like coming home to yourself. He was so afraid of disappointing other people that he was slowly disappearing, becoming smaller and quieter and more invisible with each passing day. Aaron saved him, saved me, not through some grand romantic gesture, but through simple presence, patient understanding, and the radical act of seeing me clearly and loving what he saw. He showed me that authenticity wasn't something to be afraid of, but something to be celebrated, that being true to yourself was the only way to be truly happy. As I get out of the car and walk toward our front door, toward the warm light of our kitchen and the man who changed everything, I'm smiling, really smiling, the kind that starts deep in your chest and spreads outward until it transforms your entire face. It's the smile Aaron taught me, the one that comes from being exactly who you're meant to be with, exactly who you're meant to be with. The parking lot where it all began is miles behind me now, but I carry its lesson with me every day. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives happen in the most ordinary places. Sometimes salvation comes not in dramatic revelations, but in quiet recognition, in someone seeing you clearly and choosing to stay. Sometimes learning to smile means first learning to stop pretending, to stop performing, to stop being afraid of your own heart. I'm no longer the person who was found crying in a parking lot, but I'm grateful to him for being brave enough to let himself be found. Without his tears, his confusion, his desperate need for something real, I never would have discovered the joy of being authentically, completely, unapologetically myself. I never would have learned that love, real love, doesn't ask you to be someone else. It celebrates exactly who you are and helps you become even more yourself. Tonight, Aaron and I will have dinner together, probably discuss wedding plans, maybe watch a movie or read in comfortable silence. It will be ordinary and perfect, another small piece of the life we're building together. And I'll fall asleep next to him feeling grateful for that night in the parking lot, for his kindness, for the courage we both found to choose love over fear. The rain may have stopped, but the lessons it taught me continue. Sometimes you have to get lost before you can be found. Sometimes you have to break down before you can break through. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, someone will find you at your lowest moment and become the reason you learn to smile.